Well, Saints, what a blessing and joy it is to get to see you and maybe facilitate or join with you in looking at a matter that the brothers let me know some time ago had come forth as a question and a subject of concern in their interactions with you. And that is the hazards presented by internet and excessive internet and video game usage by our children and young people. And so I'd like to just spend time until you're ready to stop. We can just let me know when you're ready to stop, and we can stop then. Until then, we can just look at this matter and try to together glean some important considerations from it. Now, we're not just any group of parents would have reason to be concerned about this matter, of course, because the prevalence of electronic devices and the use of them not only has gone broadly to where almost everything, operates and involves the use of these electronic devices, but it's gone downward to where from their earliest times, our children and sometimes even our toddlers are exposed to and learn to receive from and use electronic devices. So the impact of the use of these devices has been an increasing matter of concern for parents in general, and even more so among believers. And then among believers, perhaps even more so, or I could say most, among us. Well, why most among us? Well, it's not a secret to us that we're very hopeful that our upcoming generation, our children, will be used for the Lord by the Lord in a very specific way. You know, we do hope that they would be a generation of such seekers of His that they would together form a generation that could give Him a way to come back. To do that, they need all the time, all the resources, all the support, and all the help they can get. They need to have a good beginning. They need to have a good continuation, and eventually they'll need to have a good approach to the finish line. They'll have to not encounter detours and major complications in their life. And so, of course, this is opposed by our enemy Satan, who would like to keep that from happening, of course, the emergence of an age-turning generation. And so he resists at every age level. We're varying in age, but we're all older. I think we all can testify that we sense resistance from the evil one as we pursue the Lord and as we seek the building up of the church and the churches. But Satan has his own kind of wisdom, which is quite astute, diabolical, which is to use the major portion of his resistive capacity where it's going to do the most good. And so although we encounter and sense resistance, the resistance we sense, I don't think, is at all comparable to the endeavor and the investment that the enemy puts into damaging and harming our children and our young people. And so the cosmos, the worldly system of Satan, has its many departments and many areas designed to encounter and frustrate all of those who would like to be for the Lord. But if there's a department that is well funded by Satan and developed, it would be how to damage the vessel of our young people, our children and young people, so that they're retarded in their progress, they're held back, they don't mark the milestones of spiritual progress that we and he would like them to. This is what the enemy tries to do. So most of us are in a somewhat sheltered kind of situation where we don't see that much the nuances and the variations and the refinements and the sophistication of what the enemy would do to hinder and damage our young people in general, or specifically how he would use the matter of electronic devices, which are, this word ubiquitous. They're everywhere, and they're required to be everywhere. So it's not meaningful to talk about raising our young people and children without electronic devices. They're going to have and going to be required to use with facility the electronic devices. How we can bring them to escape the hazards that are there, so that they can be the lovers, the loving pursuers of the Lord that we hope that they would be. So in the little handout that I gave you, which if we can try to sense if a certain area is of interest to you, we can spend more time. My handout has a little bit more information on it. I wanted to have yours be on one sheet. So if any one of you would like to have the copy that has more subpoints, just let me know. Send me an email note, and I'll email it to you with joy related to your interest. Okay, so the title just makes a note that what we're talking about is electronic device usage, and particularly excessive usage, or the proclivity or the propensity, the possibility that our young person unattended would fall into what we would call excessive use of the internet, and in particular for our children, young people, excessive use of internet games, and what can happen to them if they do get overly involved in them. So how about we can read through this, and I can make comments as we go. So the first section, Roman number 1, talks about considerations mainly related to the developmentally important stage of preschool children and elementary school children. That's Roman numeral 1. Then Roman numeral 2 is more devoted to this issue as it relates to junior high and high schoolers and college students and even young adults. Well, I guess you could say any adult. So Roman number 1 is, again, related to this matter as it affects younger children. A refers to a study that was done to look at trends in internet and media use by children. And Common Sense Media, SF there stands for San Francisco, a San Francisco nonprofit, made these observations, may seem dated now, in 2013. But in some of these, I didn't find roughly comparable update from the last few years, so I thought we'd use this, and then in some of the notations it points out that there is a burgeoning, do you know the word burgeoning? An expanding problem here, and that quite a difference could be noted over a few years in their follow-up. So since this was 6 years ago, we can imagine that these trends of concern probably haven't reversed. If we had accurate, up-to-date information that matches this, we'd probably find that it's a bit more grim and a bit more of concern today than it was in 2013. I think we'd agree with that, wouldn't we? So one says, among families with children age 8 and under, there's been a 5-fold increase in the ownership of tablet devices, such as iPads, from 8% of all families in 2011 to 40% in 2013. So I'm not sure we could make a linear projection there from 2013 to 2019, but if we did, it'd be up around 80%, I suppose. So anyway, that's a large number of our kids. The percentage of children with access to some type of smart mobile device at home, such as a smartphone or a tablet, has jumped from half, 52%, to three-quarters, 75% of all children, in just those 2 years, 2011 to 2013. So again, we can just kind of anticipate that the number is higher now than it was then. Good. Number 2 says 72% of children 8 and under have used a mobile device for some type of media activity, such as playing games, watching videos, or using apps, and this is up from 38% in 2011. So from 38% to 72%, quite close to a doubling there, or actually more than a doubling, or close to a doubling. Young moms surely just find it very convenient to babysit their children with an electronic device. And a child exposed to a screen and its luminescence, its attractiveness, its sounds, its very rapid shifting in scenes and transition of characters, all of this is very stimulatory, very attractive, and very reinforcing for a young person, and starts to bring in the consideration that's here overall in your concern. There's such a thing that develops called compulsive use of electronic devices. Compulsive use. Compulsive pointing to the word addictive use. And we all know that, we probably all know, that if you take any kind of behavior that can establish habitual use, and you expose a certain age group to that activity or stimulus, and you compare the results to a similar age group, a similar group at a younger age, you find the emergence of compulsive use much greater the younger the exposure is. And so with the concern in our subject tonight being that, yes, there does seem to be increasing evidence that use of the internet and use of video games meets criteria for neurochemical addiction. The usage at ages under 8, age less than 1 to 8 or 1 to 8, causes one to consider that those exposed children are made susceptible by their parents' well-intended use of the video media to subsequent addictive responses to internet stimuli and video game stimuli. So this age, the fact that we start so early with this exposure, we believe to be significant in this matter of problematic or problem-related use of the internet. Then 3 says 38% of children under 2 have used a mobile device for media compared to 10% 2 years ago. So in this 2-year follow-up study, you notice in these first 3 items how big an increase there was over that 2-year interval of time. Very significant. And today, if it was 38% of children under 2 in 2013, what would it be today? 50%? 60%? 70%? We don't have that figure, but it's certainly of concern. Then 4 says the percent of children who use mobile devices on a daily basis, at least once a day or more, has more than doubled from 8% to 17%. So these are children who part of their daily routine involves phone, iPad, or some other electronic device. So they grow up and they depend upon these devices, and they're just there. They're just there. And as you know, many times a 3-year-old can use an electronic device with much more facility than we can. They know how to turn it on. They know how to go to various apps. They know how to go from one screen to another. They know how to use various apps at one time. They know apps that you don't know at age 3, right? And so this all is happening while their sensory faculties and their central nervous system is passing through initial stages of growth. So you're all probably aware that the average male completes brain development at about age 25. Did you know that? That when you married, you weren't fully developed? If you married under age 25, your brain wasn't fully developed yet? And for the ladies, for the sisters, if you were age 22 to 23, that was age 22 to 23 is the age at which a female central nervous system is fully developed. So now we're talking here, these young ones have passed through intrauterine development, which is very important in brain development, and is the most expansive time. But after that intrauterine brain development, from birth to age 5 is the most important time for central nervous system development. But similarly, every year from then on is important. After a young person reaches age 15, many of the important aspects of brain development have occurred, but certain areas such as impulse control, ability to defer gratification or to wait for a reward, or to understand something in an abstract way, or to set a goal. These things are not yet established even at that time. So it's from age 15 to age 20 that these capacities develop. At the time, one's typically in the last 2 or 3 years of high school and the first couple of years of university, and then refinements occur after, in the last couple of years of university study and thereafter. But so for these children to have daily exposure to the electronic devices and to start to form their world and their choices and their preferences around what they see on the electronic devices affects the molding and the ultimate status of their brain and central nervous system. So we only know this in principle. We don't have a way, although there are attempts going on to try to determine what the impact is of children actually using these devices. We just know, and we may refer to this again when we talk later at the end about sexually inappropriate material viewed on the internet and electronic devices. That the earlier one is exposed to these things, the degree to which it can cause restructuring of brain architecture and cause formation of control systems in the brain that match those exposures. And so here, human development and brain development is a very important question. So 5 under A says, the amount of time spent in using these devices in a typical day has tripled. So not only are they used earlier and earlier by more and more, but the amount of usage per day has tripled from an average of 5 seconds a day among children in 2011 to 50. Sorry, that's not 5. Yeah, maybe 5 minutes a day. Up to 15 minutes a day in 2013. So that may not sound like too much, but it's increasing, And as we consider those that we observe, we can realize that, these numbers have been outstripped probably in present usage patterns. Then B says, Jimmy and all, would you like to ask questions as we go along, or do you want to save questions for the end? Maybe. Okay, good. Point B says, in a UCLA study, 6th graders self-reported that they spent an average of more than 4 hours on a typical school day texting, watching television, and playing video games. So that's screen time for a 6th grader, an 11 or 12-year-old, on the average here in our area. C then brings up a particular point here, going back from point B, which talks about those who are at the upper end of our age spectrum we're considering here, the 6th graders, to go back down to those who are preschool. In C, impairment of direct parent-child interaction. So in this point, there's quite a fund of research showing the importance of mom and child eye-to-eye contact and direct interpersonal communication. So it's been shown that to the degree that the children use the internet, use electronic devices, to that degree, meaningful interaction between mom and child, maternal-child interaction, decreases. And so refinements in language skills, emotional development, bonding, ability to sense and track emotion, ability to express emotion, these things are formed especially with mom's interaction with the baby and learning from that interaction. So to the degree that a mom has less face contact or eye-to-eye contact with their child because of use of the electronic device, this is of concern that this would impair this important developmental factor. Then D says social intelligence, ability to register expressions of emotion by others. So this kind of continues from point C, where this matter, emotional intelligence, ability to sense what people are feeling and to express feelings to others, is a very important skill. And a child who goes to school unable to express or to register emotions of others and respond appropriately begins to have interrelation and relationship difficulties with their teacher and with their peers. So one says 6th graders who went 5 days without exposure to technology, digital devices, were significantly better at reading human emotions than those who had regular access to phones, televisions, and computers. So this is no surprise, I guess, but it's a striking point. If you have a child or a nephew or a niece or a grandchild who spends, as in point B, up to 4 hours a day interacting with a screen, this is liable to affect the ability of their or the quality of their socialization, their ability to relate to others and to register and express emotion. And this, of course, translates. Do you know any adults who have difficulty expressing their emotions, or identifying their own emotions, or registering emotions of others? This is serious, right? This is an important matter. Then 200D says, when babies are babies, they're learning about human interactions with face-to-face time and with speaking to parents and having things they say modeled back to them. So they view the countenance, the expressions. Mom speaks, they speak something back. Mom responds to what they speak, and thus they learn language and learn interaction. That need does not go away. So this is just a quote reinforcing the C and D. This is a quote from one of the interested and cited authorities from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Now, I've mentioned, you can imagine, speech development. Speech development is very important. So, when this kind of quality of parental-child interaction is impaired because of excessive digital device usage, there can be lags in reaching developmental milestones related to language and quality of language development, and characteristics of language development that match not the parent, but match the naughty little kids or the... I don't know if you drive to the school here on Magnolia. Do you notice that big billboard that says something like Ugly Dolls? It says Ugly Dolls. It says, it's a new movie, right? It says, I all I've seen is the billboard. I don't know about the movie, but it says Ugly Dolls, and it says perfection. I think it says perfection can stuff it, or something like that, indicating crassly to a child that they don't have to strive for improvement and set goals and improve. It's better to be to play with ugly dolls. Well, I don't know what the point is of them, but you can guess, right? So this kind of tone is there in typical video presentations and things that the kids have that's quote unquote age appropriate for them. And so rather than learning language from their parent, they learn language content, vocabulary, means of expression from these kinds of sources. And of course this is alarming to us, and would be alarming to us, and causes a kind of, this content, as you know, causes a hardening of their inner being. It causes a premature exposure, not only to thought that is age inappropriate, but that is against proper human and spiritual development as well. Then F is on adverse effects upon sleep quality, and maybe we'll have more on that in the next section, because there's a lot when you get into adult video games. There's a lot of impact on sleep, but also with children's impact upon sleep, exposure to the screen and to the light quality of the screen, and as well as content which in some cases is disturbing, other cases is stimulatory. There tends to be a lack of normalization of sleep patterns. Now, if you're a parent and you've got a preschool child, you're very interested probably in their having a reasonable sleep cycle, wake sleep cycle, right? You like them to sleep well so they're not cranky and irritable during the next day. You like them to sleep well, sleep through the night if possible, because if they don't sleep through the night, guess who else doesn't sleep through the night? But with usage of these devices, there's an impact both on, number one, sleep induction. So the amount of time it takes a child who heavily uses or is heavily exposed to electronic screens, it takes a longer time for them to go to sleep. Then they spend less time at deeper levels of sleep. So there's less rapid eye movement sleep, less restorative sleep. And so even if they sleep the same amount of time, the quality of the sleep isn't as good. And they tend to sleep less time, tend to wake up more, tend to have more nightmares, and that kind of thing. So sleep quality has been noted to be an issue. Then G says, effect on mood and personality. 1, children and teens who persistently logged onto Facebook were more likely to present with psychological issues such as mania, paranoia, aggressiveness, antisocial behavior, narcissism, and substance use. So there's something called complex B personality disorders. And persons who have these disorders are just plagued because they suffer. They suffer. And it's not the subject tonight to go into definitions of these disorders, but these disorders include, number 1, antisocial personality, narcissistic personality, aggressive personality, compulsive personality. And so these persons who have these traits suffer greatly in day-to-day and central relationships. Persons with personality disorders are typically dissatisfied with relationships, and those who are in relationships tend to be dissatisfied with them. They have a history of fragmented or broken relationships. They don't do well at the workplace. They don't do well at school either. Kids who have personality disorders. So these things that are mentioned here under G1, these are features, especially of these personality disorders. Now, we don't mean to say here that a child using a digital device is going to develop a personality disorder, or that use is causally associated. But I do want to point out that these symptoms that are here are the symptoms that are prominent with these types of personality disorders, and they were associated in this study as emerging with increased screen time with digital devices. And of course, at the end we have substance use, which isn't a personality disorder, it's a separate disorder, but also is important. And we'll probably talk about that when we talk about the clinical evidence that internet viewing and gaming actually is an addictive, can cause an addictive disorder, that is demonstrable both radiologically and pathologically. When I say radiologically, that means with X-ray and imaging studies. And pathologically, by that I mean that if you actually look at the tissues are actually different. There's a change in the tissues themselves. G2 says, children who regularly use the internet and play video games exhibit more anxiety and depression than those who do not. And so point 2, although maybe I should have them in reverse order, depression and anxiety related to heavy use of electronics is much more common than the points in 1. These things in 1, paranoia, aggressiveness, antisocial behavior, narcissism, these occur and are noted, but depression or mood impact, maybe we should say mood impact. Mood impact is considered to be common. And we'll talk a little bit, and that also relates to the matter of addiction and the neurochemical changes that occur with repetitive digital device use. Now, obviously, but maybe not as directly consequential to us, is that kids who use electronic devices more than others tend to be more sedentary than their companions. And because they're more sedentary in their childhood years, they tend to be more sedentary as they progress. A sedentary child tends to be a sedentary adolescent, a sedentary teen tends to be a sedentary adult, and a sedentary adult tends to have poor health or be subject to a number of serious health issues. So it is important for us to try to make sure that in whatever kind of usage of electronic devices our children are involved in, that it doesn't substitute for playtime, for athletics, for games, for when I say games, outside kind of play. And then I says loss of interest in toys, other forms of play, and in outdoor activities. So child psychologists and developmental psychologists find that the variety of forms of play are helpful developmentally. So it's helpful for a child to be involved in different kinds of play forms and different kinds of activities. But if a child insists and wants to hold their iPad and be on their iPad, and that displaces other activities, that's another developmental downside for them. Okay, then J, the development of reading skills can be impaired. K, potential development on central nervous system development. I've kind of referred to that. L, possible predisposition to addictive disorders. So let me defer this mainly to the second section. But if you have, if a young person or a young adult has an addictive disorder, or is tending toward an addictive disorder, they have an increased likelihood of developing a habit of excessive internet device use. And that's not too surprising. Someone who has one addiction, we have a phenomenon in health called cross-addiction. Someone who has a significant addiction of one type can easily develop an addiction of another type. But what we didn't realize was the other way around, and that is that it turns out that electronic device use, digital device use itself engenders addictive behavior and becomes addictive behavior, which then opens the door to other and subsequent addictive behaviors, such as the prototype is substance abuse disorder. Of course, there are others. An uncommon one among us would be gambling. Gambling is another disorder, which wouldn't be nearly as common, but is another activity that we know now is subject to central nervous system control as a compulsive behavior that one is not able, without assistance, to emerge from. But so we'll talk in just a little bit about why device usage engenders addiction, why it does. Now, M says impaired capacity for delayed gratification and patience. Well, as I mentioned, the capacity to delay gratification is established substantially by the mid-teenage years, and before it still is in a developmental stage, some developing process. The coincidence of excessive internet usage before you have that capacity developed predisposes you to the immediate gratification that internet usage and gaming gives. So up until a young person is after age, say, 16, they are very predisposed to developing excessive usage because internet usage is so gratifying. I mean, you may not find it gratifying, but at a basic level, there are neurophysiologic reasons why it is gratifying and reinforcing. And so again, it works that way. If you're not fully developed in terms of ability to delay gratification, you're subject to problematic internet usage. But research shows it also works the other way. If you get involved with excessive internet and video game usage, that retards the development of ability to delay gratification and subjects one to excessive usage. Let's see, so N, right? Profile of aggressivity as a result of exposure to scenes of violent acts and weapons. So this is of concern, right? Even some of the video presentations that preschool children view frequently espouse and present and glorify violent scenes. Physical aggression, bullying, killing, dying with no, these characters die and then they just jump right up again, right? So these themes have a certain impact on the emotional development and the judgment formation of the children. So one says approximately 80% of movies include some depictions of violence. Oh, sorry. You don't have that point, do you? Yeah. So I'll just read that to you. I said 80. It's actually 90. Approximately 90% of movies include depiction of violence. 70% of video games present violence. 60% of TV shows do. And 15% of music videos, all these depict violence. And the average child, maybe not among us, but the average child in the USA sees approximately 12,000 violent acts, 12 to 15,000 violent acts on television or on electronic media annually. So you can divide that by the number of days in the year, and you can see how many times they see something violent, and to think that wouldn't impact them, impact their psyche, impact their emotional development, impact how they viewed violence and aggression, this is certainly something we need to consider. Then, impact on early alcohol and tobacco use. So we're all concerned about this because of all the messages that there are in society in general, validating and even encouraging alcohol and tobacco use. Of course, it's less now than maybe it used to be a generation ago, but still it's quite glorified. So in sports scenes and as well as in childhood video children's video presentations. So I had here for you this fact. Adolescents view between 1,000 and 2,000 beer commercials annually. Usually conveyed with a message that real men drink beer. And there's convincing data that advertising by alcohol and tobacco companies substantially drives the usage of these gateway drugs, the alcohol and tobacco, in our late elementary and early junior high school years. And so that that statistic mainly refers to television viewing young people, but I think if our young people substitute television viewing with internet or other video things, they'll have at least that much probably exposure to it. Then P, the formation of sexual values and norms. So this goes without saying, right? So portrayal of sexual contact between non-married adults are 25 more times more frequently presented than among married adults. So in other words, in television and in video presentations, children see sexually related activity between non-married people 25 times more frequently than they see that between husband and wife. And we all know about the presentation of same-gender sexual relations and the way these are validated and encouraged on media presentations. So, to end this section, I'll skip Q and go to R. Some considerations there. Screen time should be limited to 2 hours a day for children ages 3 to 18. Now note this, for children 2 years and younger, they should have none. They should have no exposure to electronic devices under age 2. That's the American Academy of Pediatrics. Internet and digital device usage should be monitored, and as much as possible, devices should be used in residence common use areas. Number 3, of course, I think we all try to minimize viewing of television by our children, and rightly so, as some of these statistics indicate. But we should have as a rule that there should not be a television in a child's bedroom. So this was a recommendation of the American Academy of Pediatrics again. Okay, so how are you doing in terms of stamina? Are you ready? Are you willing? Do you want to stop there or keep going to Roman numeral 2? Okay, so mainly you're wondering about what to do, right? So we mainly covered that in this last point. So the limitations of screen time, the use of electronic media by children should be supervised. That doesn't mean you have to be with them every second, but they shouldn't have stretches of time where they're not supervised. It's best if they use, especially as they get older, if they use electronic devices in common areas in the residence rather than secluded areas. Yes, they always have to be supervised. Yes. Yeah. Maybe, and then as they get older, there are some areas of supervision that one can do. One, as you know, can apply certain limitations to internet access. There are programs that can be installed, software that can be downloaded to limit access to certain things from an internet source, filters, and you should be able to track the internet sites that your child visits so that you know where they visited. So these are some things, but mainly what we should do is do our best to substitute wholesome, meaningful interactions with them rather than leaving them to interact with an electronic device. So we should substitute device use with reading with them, reading to them, reading with them, taking them out for activities, outdoor activities, encouraging their interest in outdoor activities like hiking and gardening and sports where appropriate, that kind of thing. And if you're going to have them view the internet, not only would you supervise it, but occasionally that supervision should be so involved that you actually watch it, sit down with them. And many times, I think you've probably had the experience of when you sit down and actually watch what they're watching, you can be shocked and say, I didn't have any idea that kind of thing was going to be on there. You know, many of the titles or the general presentations can appear very innocent, and but there can be integrated there or even hidden there content that isn't good for them. Jimmy, maybe should I project how much time should I spend on Roman number 2 so that we have time for questions and still finish on time? So I'll fit it into whatever amount of time. Oh, good. Yeah, that's plenty of time. Okay. So let's go on now to the older ones in Roman numeral 2, supplemental matters related to the use of internet and electronic devices by young people and college students. So A says anyone can be susceptible to excessive internet use and its complications. So we'll see in a moment that there are some predisposing risk factors for problems with internet usage, but anyone can develop a problem, and so we all have to be careful with this. And wrote down a couple of examples. There's a gentleman named Ryan Van Cleve, who, as a university professor with a distinguished career, in the midst of it, became addicted to the internet and was subject to deterioration in his academic career. Then Andrew Doan was another person who's been outspoken regarding this. He is a physician researcher, MD, PhD, with emphasis in his expertise is in neuroscience. But he became addicted to video games. He got addicted to video games, and he confesses to 20,000 hours of video game playing over a period of time that resulted in a decline over a period of 8 to 9 years. 20,000 hours that resulted in a loss of his status as a professor. So, just these things are powerful neurochemically, and it's not always someone who is predisposed who would have problems. So B says usage reaches a point that it corresponds to definitions of addiction. So A says general definition. So you're probably familiar with a definition or typical definitions of an addictive behavior. So what do we mean when we say you're addicted to alcohol, you're addicted to another chemical such as methamphetamine, you're addicted to gambling, or there are other addictions. This means that you have excessive, what would be described as excessive and repetitive use. That impairs your daily living. It upsets your daily living, such that you yourself recognize that it's a problem and decide to stop, and you can't. And you're not successful in stopping. That's the definition of addiction. So frequent repetitive use impairs your daily living to the point that it becomes a problem. You decide you're going to discontinue this behavior, whether it's a substance or whether it's some other behavior. You decide you're going to stop, and you are unsuccessful in stopping. So that is what defines an addictive behavior. So internet addiction, video game addiction, involves that, where you yourself would say and observers would say, wow, you're on the internet a lot. You're on the internet a lot. And then it rises to a point where it interferes with relationships, job performance, financial status, health, and you say, wow, and others say, wow, you've got a problem, and so you decide, I'm going to cut back on video gaming or internet usage, and you try to, and you can't. You might say, is it true that there are people who can't cut back on their internet usage? Well, yes, there are, and that is why it began to be considered, or a consideration began. Could it be that internet and video game use could end up being an addiction? Could be addictive. And as I've said, it turns out that that's exactly the case. Now here we have afterwards some predisposing things, and we'll have some more in a subsequent point. This first one is depression. So depression is the most common one, and maybe I'll talk here about a little bit of the physiology here. Why internet or video media exposure is addictive. Okay, the first thing is that brain circuitry responds to a positively perceived stimulus in a way of favoring a repetition of that stimulus. So, in a non-addiction related illustration, you meet someone, enjoy that interaction, your brain tells you, I'd like to talk to that person again. If it's a neutral interaction, there may not be that kind of result, but you enjoy talking to someone, and there are neurochemical factors in the brain that favor and make you inclined to want to contact that person again and repeat that experience. If you have a negative contact with someone, the brain also has the ability of neurochemically making it so that you're more likely to avoid contact with that one and try to escape contact with that one. So the brain responds to what it perceives as a positive experience, and there's a part of the brain called what's actually the mesocortical limbic system at the center of the brain. Just so you know, it does have a name, but it contains what is called for discussion reward centers. And these reward centers are active in these neurochemical enhancements that cause you to seek repetition of what has been in the past a positive experience. That's one thing that this reward center does. The other thing is that when something is both positive and occurs frequently, the urgency to repeat that is increased. And this goes back to what's called operant conditioning, which you may have had if you studied psychology, where you found that that exposure of a laboratory animal to a positive experience frequently versus occasionally caused that animal to want that experience more, because he'd experienced it frequently. Then further, if a rewarding experience is short, if it's brief, it becomes more powerful and more attractive as governed by this reward center. So when you think of how a smartphone works, and you have shifting from different apps and different scenes, and the different scenes by their content, by their color, by the sound, by different things, impact your brain in a positive sense, and they're meant to be attractive, right? But they're coming fast. They're coming fast. So they're positive, they're frequent, and then finally, they're of short duration. So they become potent stimulants to the reward center to form dopamine-related neurochemicals that will cause your psyche to want that experience repeated to varying degrees of intensity. And so because the video games and the appearance before you of prompts and things that pop up, pop-ups, and so on, they come at you, they're brief, but they're something striking. They're striking, but they're brief, they come frequently, they hit the reward center. And they start to imprint a desire to have that again, have that again, have that again. So this is true in the adult brain, but it's even more true in the developing brain. And so that goes back to what we were covering in the first section. So it turns out that when you have this sequence of something positive that is repetitive and very brief, and your brain causes you to seek it out and to hold you there, interestingly, with human subjects, even if you're seeing something for the first time and it's affecting you in this way, and you have, say, a 10-minute exposure, and then it's taken away from you, then you have a neurochemical registration of compulsion and craving for reinstitution of that thing, and that is sensed as depression. You feel you don't feel good. You feel out of sorts. You feel down. You feel irritable. And you feel like, I want to get back to feeling good and feeling okay by what I saw on the screen. And so this probably happens initially at a very fine and initial level where you don't really recognize it, but they have ways of measuring these responses. And they've found that in an adult that's just exposed newly to the internet and has this kind of rapid onset exposure, for less than half an hour, they'll have what can be measured as withdrawal symptoms. After half an hour of exposure to a multi-stream barrage from the internet. So the reason I went into that is it mentions here depression. So Actually, I'd like to suggest that although both two and three, I really would like to redo this and put them in another section. These two are not part of the definition of addiction as much as they are predisposing factors, I would say. So someone who is depressed is more likely to be involved with internet addiction. Someone who is impulsive. Do you have any children that are impulsive? Do you have any family members that are impulsive? Are you impulsive? Well, if you're impulsive, if there's a profile of impulsivity, you're more susceptible to excessive internet usage. Now, 4 under B, preoccupation, tolerance, lying regarding usage, and conflict directly resulting from usage are typical of addictive behaviors. There's a tendency in psychology to personify addictive behavior as if it were a satanic, diabolic person within you. Does that sound? These are unbelievers talking this way. But it says the addiction within you will fight to preserve itself and to foster the addictive behavior. So, the addictive person, not wanting to lie about it, tends to cover up his usage, whether it's a drug or whether it's the internet, and say, no, I don't really do that. Either intentionally or unintentionally, and covering it up. This is true. This tends to be true of all addictive behaviors. Preoccupation means that someone who uses the internet excessively wants to use it. They go someplace, and the first thing they want to do is find their device, get out their computer. Have you had anybody admitted to the hospital and they go stir crazy because they don't have they can't get along without their electronic device? That's called preoccupation. So someone who has cocaine abuse has preoccupation with that. If they're not under the influence, they are thinking about how to get it and thinking about how it would feel to get it, and they're under compulsion and craving. That's preoccupation. People who use the internet excessively feel this way. I need my device. I want to get online. So this correlates with other addictions. Tolerance. Tolerance is a feature of addictive behavior. So tolerance is this. If you know anyone who has problems with alcohol, alcohol is the classic example of tolerance development. So someone drinks alcohol and they start out drinking 3 cans of beer at night to relax. And they get a relaxation effect. They relax. Then after a while, they drink 3 cans of beer wanting to get from it relaxation, and they don't. They don't get it. So they say, well, maybe if I drink a little bit more. They drink 4, get a little bit, drink 5 or 6, then they get it again. So now they have to drink 6 cans of beer to get relaxed. So they do that for a while. Then they find out drinking 6 cans of beer, they're still taught. So they try 10. And with 10 cans, they get a little bit relaxed. Then after a while, with 10 cans of beer, they're not relaxed. And on it goes. So this is how substance use causes escalation of quantity of the substance, because a given amount of the substance loses the effect it initially had, but the person is desperate to recover that previous effect, and so they use more. So this occurs with internet. So people who get a certain amount of enjoyment out of the use of the internet, a certain kind of feeling of well-being, will find after a while they'll use the internet and they don't get that unless they use it more and stay online longer, and then they get it. Now this may not apply to you, but this applies to persons who develop this condition. Let's see, maybe I can go on now. 5. Well, 5 I'm going to say also it would be more of a predisposing factor, loneliness and isolation. And here I put in Persons who use video games get to where they actually think they have friends, but they never see them. They've never looked at them. They've never had contact with them. And persons who get addicted to video games lose their ability to determine what a real friend is. And to them, a real friend is a virtual friend, someone who has never been and may never be in their proximity, but they contact only through the internet. So this is a phenomenon of video game addiction. And I mentioned already withdrawal symptoms, huh? Under withdrawal symptoms, I don't know if you have it on yours, but I have here internet addicts are more likely than non-addicts to experience withdrawal symptoms following a brief 15-minute exposure. A pronounced decline in mood prompts addicts to promptly re-engage in the internet. Then C, the prevalence of internet use, the prevalence of usage. So one says, maybe I should ask maybe I could take one of these copies so I can tell if what I'm reading to you have or not. Yeah, so under C, the prevalence of internet use and or video game addiction. Video games, social media, smartphone usage, texting, streaming videos, and online pornography all have been demonstrated to have addictive potential. All those. Video games, social media, smartphone usage, texting, streaming videos, and online pornography have all been demonstrated to have addictive potential. Video game addiction, including, have you heard of massively multiplayer online games? So massively multiplayer online games are particular games that I must admit I've never seen one of them myself. I don't know. Anyway, the most common one, 40% of those who log on and become involved in this game become addicted. 40%. And so this involves people from multiple places in the world taking on certain roles and involving themselves, particularly in battle-related strategies and conflict-related games. Prevalence of internet addiction ranges in different studies. Worldwide, there are all kinds of different results. They're as low as 5% and as high as 27% of persons with some profile of addiction to the internet. Then, under identification D, the diagnostic criteria for internet usage are the same as those used for substance abuse and gambling disorders. So if you were to go to a mental health professional, they would take the criteria for gambling disorder, which is in you may be familiar with DSM-5, the last diagnostic and statistical manual of the American Psychological Association, which is what defines mental health problems in the world. It has a listing not for internet addiction or for video game addiction, but it's recommended by them now until the next version comes out that you take the criteria for gambling addiction or substance abuse addiction and use those criteria and just substitute internet. In other words, internet will do the same thing to you that substance abuse does and the gambling does in engendering an addiction. There are a number of screening instruments that you can easily find, yes, on the internet. Go to the internet and it will give you devices to find out if you're addicted to the internet. And so there are a There are a number of them. The most common one common one, just so you can get an idea, will give you three. It gives you three criteria, and you score these three criteria, each one on a score of 1 to 4. The first one is, do you experience social anxiety related to a preference for internet usage to the exclusion of real-life relationships? Are you anxious about whether you can use the internet or not? And do you use it to a degree that it affects your real-life relationships? Rate on a scale of 1 to 4. Then 2, do you feel withdrawal when you're not using the internet? Rank on a scale of 1 to 4. And 3, do you lose motivation to do other things that you need to get done because of the internet? Do you lose motivation to do things you should do? Rate on a scale of 1 to 4. So that's one screening device. There are others that may have up to 27 different questions that you can ask. But there are various ways. So if you're trying to identify someone who really has a problem, number one is to use a screening device. And if the screening device is suggestive, it doesn't mean they have internet or video game addiction disorder. It just means it should be checked more fully. Then what's recommended is talk to the person and find out if there are red flags. Red flags. So what are red flags? So the main red flags are academic decline because of video game use and excessive time on the internet. Number 2, sleep disruption. And number 3, change in real-life pattern of activities and relationships. So those are the main red flags. Then I'll just read to you these predisposing factors. I don't think we have them there. So these are some of the predisposing factors. Novelty seeking in a person in their personality profile. If they're novelty seeking, if they have mood difficulties, if they use alcohol, if they have anxiety, if there's a profile of poor parental or psychological support for them in their world, if there's poor support network or lack of parental support, they're more predisposed. With that, fragmented nuclear family, broken marriage, etc., aggressiveness, poor social adjustment, loss of empathy or low empathy for others, poor school performance. Any student is predisposed because they have to be on the internet. Cyberbullying and attention deficit disorder. All these are predisposing factors. Okay, then E says reinforcing or rewarding factors. Why would someone want to or get involved with video gaming or internet usage? So most of these points are related to video games specifically. One is that when you're playing one of these video games, you present yourself in a certain way. They know you through the way you present yourself. So someone who's not happy with their life situation or their own personality or life event profile can alter that profile and present themselves in the way they wish they were or the way they would like to be. And so this is why it's probably risky to find a mate on the internet. Well, there are a lot of problems with that, but you know. Anyway, this is one listed motivation why people can develop an imaginary, surreal world and place themselves in this imaginary world and live there. And it becomes their reality. And, you know, we haven't talked in parallel since the beginning about the spiritual correlate of all this, but we can see all this displaces the Lord Himself as reality. And so it exposes the enemy's strategy to realize these things. 2, if someone doesn't do so well at relationships and they're threatened or anxious in relationship settings, They don't have to be anxious because who they meet and who they talk to, they can just click off anytime they want. They can disappear. There's no threat. There's no reason for anxiety, so non-threatening socialization. And then competition and rank status achievement in video games. Video games are designed to incur addiction, to make the user want to be involved more and to use the game more. And there's a science to this, and they are very skillful at this. And so by bringing into the game certain performance statuses, you do this successfully, and you get reward, and you get a certain qualification or status. And as you go on, as you're more experienced, you get a higher status than others, and others look up to you because you are advanced more than they are, and you have an uplifted status. As warped as it is, it's very real and can take over a person's lives. To the point that people lose their jobs. You have, like, it's 8:10. It's 8:10 p.m. But if you step into a video game, it's not 8:10 p.m. It's another time. And you're with people who are in different time zones. And now your reference point is the video game. And you're supposed to be at work at a certain time, or accomplish something at a certain time, or make note of something at a certain time. And that becomes more and more relevant to you as you're involved in this video game, which becomes your new world and your reality. And you just set aside things that are not so important because they're not so real to you, but they're actually the real world. So this actually happens. And marriages dissolve because of this. Executives become dysfunctional because of this. And young people have problems. And then here's the fear of missing out. Fear of missing out on what? Well, eventually, on the internet, and related, when you develop a sphere of contacts on the internet, and they're involved with things, doing things, talking about things, evidently those who are compulsively involved don't want to miss what's going on. And so they get involved to not miss out. Then maybe I'll just go, so associated conditions, that may not be so important to us. These are medical conditions that, these are mental health conditions. I'll just read them. Depression, anxiety, bipolar mood disorder, personality disorders, ADHD, autism spectrum, and alexithymia. So alexithymia is a new word for us. Alexithymia is the condition that I referred to earlier. Alexithymia is when you cannot identify your own emotions or the emotions of others. That's alexithymia. Persons who have this, and also sexual abuse history, those who have suffered sexual abuse, tend to be more inclined to internet addiction. Then, I mentioned a little bit about sleep before. I'll just mention this briefly. Impact upon sleep. Reduction in total sleep time, delayed induction, decreased sleep quality, excessive daytime sleepiness, and the effect of global time zone differences in video gaming. And then I'll close with these last two, H and I. So H and I are H is quite interesting and involves the neurobiological model for internet addiction. And it turns out that if you have someone who uses the internet excessively, they have neurocognitive testing, psychological testing, neurocognitive testing, and brain imaging changes that match persons who have substance abuse disorders, like cocaine addiction and other things. And what's postulated is there at the very center of the brain, there's what we call a GO network and a stop network, to simplify it somewhat. So this part of the brain you could envision as having the shape of your fist, and there are neural branches that work their way up, nerve complexes that operate with a neurochemical called dopamine. And then you have other ones that work their way down, and these operate with a neurochemical called glutamine. And glutamine causes you to be on the alert, protect, draw back, assess, and wait. Dopamine causes you to go for it. Lay hold of it, and you've got to have it. And so persons who have substance abuse disorders, there's an imbalance between the dopamine and glutamine input, with the dopamine prevalent over the glutamine, and so you have aggressivity related to such things as drug seeking, sexual behavior, aggressive behavior, things of this nature. Now, just to video gaming has been shown, video gaming itself causes release from the originating part of the brain in this Go network, which is called the nucleus accumbens, which is the center of the pleasure area, in a magnitude similar. So the amount of dopamine release caused by compulsive internet usage matches that released by recreational drug use. So the person is subject to this, and compulsive behavior results. Now, when there is, both in substance abuse disorders and in internet use disorder, there are both prefrontal, which has to do with judgment and personality, prefrontal, gray cortical matter, and in this mesocortical thymic area, actual changes demonstrable on MRI, functional MRI, and PET scanning. 3 different neuroimaging modalities can identify actual neurophysiological changes in persons who have compulsive internet use. And those changes match the changes seen with those same modalities in substance abuse disorders. So this is a powerful thing. So back to the beginning, the more we can do to take care of our children in a way that they don't get excessively involved at an early stage in electronic device usage, prevents these kinds of changes from occurring, period, or at an early age that can then develop more fully later. Now, sexually inappropriate content, if internet viewing itself is addictive, how much more addictive is it when you have pornographic material? And sexually inappropriate images come up before a person who is developmentally immature, to say developmentally immature. So the average age of initial exposure to pornography is shockingly early, to where I'm not sure I can explain how it happens or where it comes from, but it's not unusual to have someone in the 4th to 6th grade have initial exposure to pornography, and then have the factors that we've talked about related to internet use in general operate, but then have those amplified and intensified by the nature of what they see. And so not only is internet use addictive, but viewing of pornography is considered by and large to be addictive. Now, there is, in both of these, you could find, if you were to go look for persons to say, I don't believe that this is actually an addictive condition, you can find persons. But the vast majority of the evidence and the professional understanding is that both of these are addictive and have to be treated as addictions to be able to be released from their power. And so particular attention is needed to watch out for, and amazingly, it's both for the boys and the girls. Both the boys and the girls have to be protected from early exposure to sexually inappropriate material, because if they get exposed, this can become something, it can become a real curse to them. It can become something very dominant that they find themselves helpless before, and they compulsively seek this. And it doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it's tragic. And so among us, we definitely have persons who, we know, and that I have known, who lament that they suffer from this, would give anything to not suffer, not be subject to it, but they are, because they got exposed to it at an early age. The earlier the exposure occurs, the stronger it is. And this, of course, if unresolved prior to full adult life, married life, will become a catastrophic problem for them. So let me stop there, and I don't know if I've left time for questions or not. I didn't ask again about your stamina. I've probably already gone far beyond.
I think if anybody needs to go, it's okay, but if somebody would like to stay and ask questions.
Yeah, how about that? I'll stay. And if you need to go, please feel free.
We do have...
I think in principle it surely can be, but it depends a little bit on the age and also on the profile of the child. You probably know the kind of psychological orientation of the child, and if you knowing your child, realize that a consideration that there could be something that would come as a harmful result would be beneficial, then yes. There are some kids who, knowing that, would go for it more. So it takes some consideration and tailoring of that recommendation. But in general, I do think that information is helpful. Education is helpful to children, especially after their mid-elementary school age. They can begin to realize they don't want problems. They don't want adverse consequences. And I believe that, in general, yes, I believe it's helpful. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. I think there must be, and I believe this recommendation still stands, but it surely conflicts with the fact that in schools they're thrown into these environments, or they're obliged to be in these environments. I think that it may be that the essence of the addictive part is the stimulatory nature that comes with commercially designed content, and to be doing academic work that wouldn't have that same kind of stimulation maybe would relieve the activity of most of its downside. You still have the interaction with the screen and those things, but yes, this is part of the unavoidable exposure that we're just going to have to develop strategies to try to limit the non-beneficial effect. So yes, I think so. I think probably if in school there are 4 hours, 6 hours of, whatever number of hours of screen time, those hours wouldn't be as threatening potentially as if they were elective use or video presentation or video game use of media that the child had chosen. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very good. Thank you.